Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here at Maria Jimena. It's my second time at the Protection Conference. I found it incredibly good last time, so I decided to come back and participate in the EDGY. So I'm going to start with a little bit about myself, so you get a little more familiar. So, first disclaimer, today is going to feel a little bit like a Canadian introduction. More than half of your speakers are going to be Canadian. So I'm only the second one in this session.
You can go with your being Russian, just go with that, so you have a little bit of diversity.
Okay, fine. All the Canadians have some kind of history.
Okay.
And some kind of roots. They can be further remote, they can be closer. So yes, if I take a step back, I am from Russia, but I spent a lot of time already in Canada, so I'm more Canadian by now. In terms of the work and what I do for a living, I started in the business analysis field, but because I'm always curious and I actually love the profession because you get to learn things and you're not really stuck with one thing. I learned and learned and learned. Eventually, I became an architect because I love to connect the dots, right? And that's what architects are. Broader picture, connecting the dots. I'm not very hung up on the definitions as long as I'm doing a good job, right? So business architect was called strategic advisor, I've dabbled in the organizational design, enterprise designer. I'm also an architect for buildings. I've designed 3 buildings. Yay, fellow architects in a room. For me, that's more like a hobby, though, than the actual day-to-day thing. So day-to-day is still strategic planning is a huge component. I'm with Zetman Works, a small consulting agency in Toronto, in Ontario, so different province. I'm not going to have any French. It's all going to be English, and I'm much more an architect than the visual designer, and it's going to be very clear from the slides. Right? But really what I refer to myself as more of a problem solver, right? So how can I help businesses, people, leaders figure out how to solve the problems? How can they make decisions? What do they need to consider? And what do they need to know to be comfortable with this? That's the broader picture. The most common use case though is a strategic planning. And we'll start right there. What is strategic planning and why strategic planning? So if you're with a fairly large organization, you probably have a strategy. You have a mission and a vision, and it usually looks great. But how many of you found that it's very hard to figure out what it actually means and how to actually get it? What does your company do to achieve that vision? Okay.
No.
It's a safe place. Yes, we're being recorded, but let's be honest with ourselves, right? So this is where we observe a lot of the disconnect, right? In the large organization specifically, how to translate that into something that's executable and people can relate to and people can see if I'm participating in this project, this is where I have an impact on strategy. This is why I'm doing this, and this is why I'm pursuing. So that's essentially what a strategic plan is. It's a list of things, list of projects usually, that needs to be executed to move closer to your strategic vision. Now, why would we want to do that? Why would we want to have it? Not a pretty picture, but communicates the idea. So this is actually from the story. Thank you for reminding me of Russian heritage. It is a Russian story about 200 years ago that by the cart. But imagine the cart is your enterprise. You want to move. You need people to move. Well, in this case, animals. In the real organization, those are usually people, though you might have some animals too. In the story, you have 3 of them. You have a swan, you have a crayfish, and you have a fish, and they're trying to move the cart in this fashion. Do you think they're going in? Yes, and the crayfish looks more like a lobster, judging by the size, but yeah, they're not really going. Pretty much going nowhere. And this is what we want to avoid in the organizations, and having a plan is a way to do that, because the plan actually aligns people and say, and they can see that we all need to pull in this one direction. We're not pulling in different places, we're all aligned. And in order to do that, you need to have a communication, you need to have a plan, and you need to know why you want to do that direction. Right? So what strategic plan really does for you is you're moving from this. This is a marketing view. And we all work great with the associations, but really what a plan is you know where you are today, you know where you want to get to, what is the best path for us to take? And then we can all take that path. So I'm going to be walking you through the methodology that we use, and I'm going to be overlaying that on EDGY. So what kind of elements we're picking as we go through the methodology. So it's actually going to be similar to the last case my friends presented. But in terms of where we use this methodology, so two main areas that have a lot of experience in the energy sector. And when we mean energy sector, we're talking about the large companies, right? So the market cap between $2 to $68 billion. We're on the mass, right? We've also applied it to Canadian private sector. So Canada recently created what's called the Canada Digital Development Program. Wonderful program, and it's targeted towards small to medium-sized private sector businesses to help them with the digital adoption. So how can they become more digital? And what the program does, so Z9 is one of the digital partners as part of this program. And the program gives the businesses grants to develop digital adoption plans. So that's what we do. Most of our services are going to be covered by that program. And then Canadian government also provides interest-free loans to implement the plan, which is amazing because the interest right now is very high. So great help. But the size of the companies that we work with as part of this program ranges drastically from the top sector about. We're talking about sometimes teeny tiny enterprises, still enterprises with 4 people, literally. Sometimes going through about 100 kids. So what we found is that basically the same methodology still works. The scale is very different. The number of people you're going to be talking is very different. So the same basic steps apply. Okay. So what are those basic steps? They are quite basic. We always start from the top. We always start from where do we want to get to? What is that vision? What's our goal? What do we want to achieve? Because that's our North Star. We want to always keep that in mind as our guiding principle as we go through the planning process. Why we're here, where do we want to get to? The second step is to understand current state. So if we refer back to the map, it's what's my location? Where am I today? And we do the analysis. Then we go into ideation and prioritization. Now that's usually a workshop. After the pandemic, we tend to do more virtuals, to be honest, especially with those large enterprises. Nobody wants to travel to do a multi-location and logistical nightmare. Personally, I would always prefer in person because it's a very different dynamic. It's much more engaging. So if you do have an option, go with the in-person one. But the reality is that we do a lot of virtuals as well. It's a necessity. So this is where we figure out together what can we do? What are the options? How can we move in that direction based on where we are? Based on the problems that we're having or deficiencies that are preventing us to get to our goal. we ideate together, and we prioritize together. But at the end of the workshop, we usually have a rough idea and rough sequence of the things that we want to do. Now, after that, we take it away and we develop the actual plan. So proper documentation and something that our clients can later on take and follow and implement in their organizations. Okay. So we're going to be diving into each step, what it means, and how it translates into EDGY. Familiar picture? And I see a lot of that today. At the very beginning, we're obviously in the identity space, in the green space, and we're largely talking about the purpose. So why are you here and what are you trying to accomplish? It could be expressed as your strategy. Sometimes you hear the term strategic imperatives, goals, could be objectives. Some KPIs are important here as well. You want those things to be measurable. You've probably heard them many times. Something that you can figure out whether or not you've actually made it to that destination point or not. Because if not, it's very hard to say whether or not you achieve. So ideally, you want them to be measurable. Now, the conference theme is sustainability. So I had to do the tie there, but it just happens so in the energy industry, sustainability is the food. So there's a lot of examples of sustainability goals and sustainability targets. So we're going to follow just a couple of examples. They're very close to reality. They're not exactly 100% what we've done, but you might have seen some of them in the organizations or just around. Pretty common one, we want to achieve net zero emissions by year X, could be 2030, could be 2050, depending on how ambitious you are, but a very common goal. So in the EDGY, that's the symbol, that's the color. Another potential goal might be is we're going to look beyond our own organization. We actually want to make sure that our ecosystem is more sustainable as well. So we're going to pay really close attention to our suppliers because we want to make sure that our suppliers are sustainable too. So the goal could be we want to increase the number or the share of the sustainable suppliers for our organization. So that's kind of the starting point. Once we have that, we can drill further in terms of what it actually looks like to come up with those things. In a lot of cases, that's an interview, usually with what we call the business sponsor for the plan. So the person who would be accountable for the whole, either whole business. If we're talking smaller ones, it could be CEO, president, whatever called. Could be, if we're talking about large organization, that's usually around vice president level, around the level between North America and Europe would be different. So 500 people, scope maybe more, right? So fairly large organizations, fairly large chunks. But this is the conversation with the leader. Where should we be going? And they need to be able to set the tone and to set the destination. And sometimes it is a conversation and those goals are non-existent. So we need to come fix them. But this is the ground. So second step is understanding the current state. And traditionally, that current state, you may be more familiar, would be more in the blue area. So capabilities and processes by assets, if we're talking digital adoption or digital transformation initiative, you obviously want to capture what kind of technologies you already have, what those are, what happens to them, right? So you're a lot in the blue space, but what we found is that you cannot stage it there. You have to understand the red space as well. Because after all, the organizations are people. And no matter how good your assets are, if your people don't know how to use them or don't like them, it's not gonna matter. So you need to understand both. So we've actually transitioned more to documenting. We still document the capabilities, that's important. But we transitioned to supplementing them with journeys rather than processes exclusively. Because what we found is that journey actually has to have the process on top. That's your context, but it does represent more of the people's feelings, and you bring people into the picture. So that's what we usually document. There's usually a capability map and a bunch of directives. So journey maps could be from a perspective of internal users. It could be from a perspective of internal customers, you can say, because if, let's say, we're working with a human resource department and a VP of human resources, it makes sense to ask the rest of the organization, how does it feel about the services that a human resources provides to them? So otherwise, your picture is not complete. It could be external customers, if we can do that. Could be suppliers or vendors in our case, but you need that. So there could be multiples there. For the example that we started with, so let's follow those two goals and what they can translate into. For the current state, let's say we're an energy company that wants to be more sustainable, right? And we're already in solar power generation business. So we have that capability to generate solar power. We have the capability to manage the solar power facilities. We know how to do that, right? And we also have some kind of a supplier diversity management, right? We want to improve on that. You may be in a case where you don't have that at all in the current state, or you may be in a case where you already have something that you want to do. Part of this assessment is not only defining what the capabilities are, but understanding, you might have heard the term maturity level. So somehow you need to gauge where that capability is. Now, your stakeholders could be receptive to maturity assessment. They may be not very receptive to somebody coming in and telling them how mature they are. So you do what you have to do in this case to make it work. But you need to gauge approximately where they are and what happens. The big part of this step is to identify what's painful, both in capabilities and through the journeys. Obviously, much more prominent on the journeys. You see those pain points, you see where it hurts, and that's the key information that you're looking for. Or gaps, things that you don't have, but you need to have to achieve those goals. So in our cases, so we do have the capability to generate the solar power and to manage those operations. But we're still a company, we have other offices, we have other things we're doing. And for those things, we need to provision energy supply. We still consume energy. Yes, we're an energy generation business, but no matter what we do, we are consuming energy. So there are some people in the organization who are accountable for provision and energy supply. And we would document their journey. What are they doing today? Who are they interacting with? What kind of utilities are they doing? What kind of bills they're getting? Right? From the supplier diversity management perspective, we can look at a journey to select a supplier. So that's an internal view. How the internal supply chain management staff selects potential or future suppliers. And we can look at the external view. What does it feel like to be a supplier who wants to work with the organization? So how do I apply to become a supplier, or what's the vetting process? So two perspectives in this would be used. Now, this is usually also in form of interviews. So we ask a bunch of questions. There are pretty set. Sometimes we have a few things here and there, depending on to what extent the technology is in scope or not, right? Or is it just pure business improvement initiative? But it is a pretty standard set of questions that we get the answers on. It's more of a conversation. And the recommendation is to go with the smaller team. So really divide your stakeholders. If you have a large umbrella, if it's a smaller company, it can be an individual one-on-one conversation. If it's a larger company, it can be a recruitment. So maybe a manager level or supervisor level, but you are looking for more on the ground perspective. You want to understand what people are experiencing. Fairly low level exposure. Once that is done, we move into our ideation and prioritization. Now, this is a workshop, and it is usually a fairly large workshop because we bring everybody that we interviewed, everybody together. During this workshop, we synthesize all the information that we've collected in the reviews. We build themes, we document. The first thing is for everybody to review what we got. And this is a great opportunity, and we always hear that it's a very valuable opportunity for people to listen to the experience of other people in the organization. How my actions are affecting another part of the organization. What's the influence? And we found that there's quite a few aha moments. Like, oh, we didn't know we were doing this. Oh, we didn't know this is what hurting you because we've done something. So that's usually a great exercise. But then this team jointly ideates on what can we do about it. If this is where we want to go, if these are the problems that we're experiencing today, what can we do about it? It's a very interactive section. Even if it's online, we try to keep it more playful because nobody likes boring meetings, nobody likes boring sweaty workshops. So making it fun is a big part of success. So this is where you find sometimes new capabilities that need to be created. Maybe some capabilities that need to be improved. So you're building essentially, if you're an architect, you're very familiar with as-is and to-be. This is where we're shaping the to-be. We built the as-is in the previous phase. This is the to-be. Do we need a different asset mix? So if we're talking about digital transformation, do we need more technology? So there are going to be assets for you here. And what needs to change in the journey experiences, right? So you identify all of those things, and quite a lot, one initiative or one idea would have an impact on more than one thing, and that's okay. If we follow our example, we have the solar power generation capability, but all of our solar farms are too far from our facilities that we're powering. So we need to consume the power. We generate the power, but we can't consume our own power. We have to buy the power. We have to provision it. Maybe it's less sustainable, right? Maybe it comes from different sources. So is there an opportunity to grab that and generate the power for ourselves? We know it's green. So can we use that? That will impact the provision energy supply and what happens with that journey, right? It will impact the stakeholders that person interact with and how this all happens. It will impact potential billing, pretty much everything, right? From the supplier diversity management perspective, it's really in a supplier selection business rules, right? So what changes we need to make in the rules and how we're screening our suppliers, maybe what information we ask from our suppliers when we vet them, for us to roll the supplier pool. Now, there could be more ideas there, right? We could go maybe with an awareness that you are looking at suppliers and you're asking them. Could be more initiatives than one, could be more ideas than one at this stage. But your journey is going to be impacted as well. Now, usually this generates a lot of ideas. Lots of sticky notes that you need to sit through, but the other goal of the workshop is also agree on the best path that we should take. So it's not just about generating as many ideas as possible, it's also converging to the list of reasonable and executable ideas that we will put on the plan. So that's the second part. In order to do that, it's a prioritization mechanism, could vary. Are more or less standard one. They call it here because I don't have it there, but it's going to look very simple. It's a matrix. And you can fill it out with stickies that have roughly 4 quadrants. And you have value on one side. So how much value will it generate for the organization through that something versus you can call it risk. You can call it complexity, but really we're talking about how hard would it be to execute, right? So And different organizations have different terms for that, but really you end up with here, and it's the participants who place them, but there are guiding principles. Value has to tie to the strategy and the goal. That's how we value things. You also want to try and get something tangible out of them. That's really the key part. How can we measure these values well? Yes, we're achieving the strategy, there's an impact on the strategy, but can we save some time? Can we save some money? What does it actually mean? Can we measure customer satisfaction potentially? Can we put some numbers in that so that we know why and when the it's started? Similar on the complexity, we usually have the guidelines. Something easy would be either quick, or will have fewer impacts across the board, or across capabilities, or across journeys, or across stakeholders. What tends to happen with things, the more stakeholders you have, the more departments you need to touch, the more cross-functional it is, the higher is your risk and the higher is your efficiency. So it just grows. This is the number of people, right? And that's pretty much it, depending on which quadrant you lay. It makes sense to do either first. So something that's high value and low complexity, those are wonderful things. Those are your quick wins. You want to get to them as soon as possible. Things that are high value and high complexity. So it's this quadrant. So this is usually something very strategic that, yes, it's more complex, but you do need to do them because they're going to have a big impact on your organization. But they're not going to be as. Now, if you have time, then you can look at lower complexity, lower value. Realistically, by the time you touch the two top quadrants, you probably have resources to be able to do anything else. Sometimes you are able to slot those in, or what you can do is you can keep them in the backlog. And if you do have resources, you can try to slot them in. I guess that's the other thing. The plans, we are producing the first version of the plan, but they're never set in stone. Really, the plans are organic things, and they need to be referred to, they need to be updated to stay true. Otherwise, they get outdated. So this is a maybe. Those are fillers. And this quadrant, so something with a high complexity and low value. What do we want to do with those? Any ideas?
Ignore them.
Forget them?
Yes. Of course. Why would we do something in that quadrant? It doesn't make any sense to spend a lot of effort on something that doesn't bring you that much value when there's something else on the board. Now, I did have cases where, yes.
We can actually compile to actually need to take a look at that because that can be a priority. That prerequisites to one or the other one highlights. Because very often we need to do something that is really boring, seems completely useless, but in the bigger picture, it's actually required in order to reach something else.
I'm going to challenge you on that and say that you put it in the wrong quadrant because if I think that this is a prerequisite, it has a much higher value.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's by itself.
It needs to move.
By itself, it's it doesn't have a value.
Yeah.
But simply eliminate, right?
Well, yeah. Don't waste your time on there because you're not getting much for it. Now, I did have cases when people would be very adamant, I really want this, right? I really want this. Like, we need to do this. So the question there is, what are you not telling me? There must be something else in there that we didn't reflect on the board. Tell me more.
May I ask? How do you define value? Is it monetary?
It's not 100% monetary.
Because I can imagine that in an oil and gas company, it's not attractive to build wind turbine network, which is complex
Not
and low value because it
necessarily.
it cannibalizes the current business.
Not necessarily, because actually a lot of the oil and gas companies diversify into the green energy because they want to get ready for the energy transition, right? If there are a forward-looking business, majority of them diversify their portfolio. And this is where they're actually moving. And wind and solar would be a higher investment priority than
Okay, so it's higher on the value. That's why I asked about the value. So it's not only monetary.
So you go back to your strategies, right? So quite often we put a matrix together of, this is our idea, which strategies it impacts and to what extent. So it could be a bit of an expert opinion, right? Is it high impact or low impact on strategy? Like, is it critical? Like, if we don't do this thing, there's no way we would be able to achieve our strategy, right? So that's obviously going to be higher value. We try our best to put monetary value in the two or something tangible. Realistically, people struggle a lot with that, but you have to do it because the very next step after we're done with the plan is they're going to go and ask for funding. I want to do this project. I need money, and they need to build a business case. If we don't have this discussion here, they're going to struggle with the business case. Right? So this is the first stage to help them build a business case later on. They will need to dig deeper, more likely. We don't have enough time to build an overall business case, but we want to get some ideas and understand where we could be. Okay.
Does it happen sometimes that you cross-reference what you have in that quadrant that we won't forget about with some external stakeholders, client, users, just to make sure that what we're discussing for strategy is actually aligned with the rest of the ecosystem? Because sometimes you can make assumptions that can be very surprised with just going in the market with the end user, etc. And maybe it's much more priority than we thought.
So ideally, you need to have those stakeholders in the workshop so they would have a voice. Not always possible, but at least have their perspective and some ownership. So if you're talking about the external customers, usually you cannot have them in the room when you're doing strategic planning, but having maybe some kind of a survey or a study done that you could feed into the workshop so that their perspective is not lost is a good idea.
I'm interested in spending so much time talking about a 2x2 sitting into that discussion.
Yeah, 5 euros.
What are you putting on there? Opportunities or conditions? So what's the actual element that you're putting in? Is that what you've got there are conditions that need to be in place for you to achieve an outcome?
So haven't gotten there.
But are you on this one?
Yeah.
What are you putting there? Are these more the opportunities before you've got to the conditions?
So these are more potential projects for yes. So from the ideas, yes. So first we have the pain points or opportunities from the interviews. Then we distill them into what are the actual ideas or potential initiatives that we want to consider. Those are the ones that go through this.
Okay, so it's actually after your conditions then. So these are the strategic opportunities we want to pursue. These are the conditions that need to be in place for us to achieve it. And then let's break that down into initiatives. So those are the initiatives we're putting on there.
Yeah. They may have dependencies, right? So you may have a cluster of them because they're related, or all of them are required to achieve the same thing. So you need to maintain that relationship and don't forget about them. So there might, some of them could be more programs. Yeah, those are already something that will eventually translate into business or a project for somebody to execute. So at the end of the workshop, we'll have these stickies. Usually we'll sequence them roughly based on where we've landed and based on the dependencies between them. That goes into the plan. So the actual plan is probably familiar. The common view is the Gantt chart. You've all seen one, right? So you end up with the bars on the Gantt chart in terms of the time frame. We usually look about 3 to 5 years out. That's kind of standard. It is hard to get people to think further out. It is even harder if you're talking about technologies because we have no idea where technology is going to be. That's what happened. It changes too quickly. So those things do need to get revised. We recommend at least once a year. Ideally, you want to review it and do a double check quarterly because business priorities change, regulations drop on us, things happen, incidents, it's life. So a lot of our stakeholders actually use the plans as a communication mechanism updates with their stakeholders on where they are and how they're progressing on the plan. So you don't want to shelve it, you want to use it. And you want to keep it current. That's the ideal world. Things happen sometimes, but really it's largely a Gantt chart with the initiatives, their sequence. We usually categorize them on the left by capabilities, so you can see which areas you're impacting. So it's good to have some categorization to them, because otherwise they may be too big. The potential initiatives for our example here could be, we want to construct those self-power facilities, right? We know how to operate the solar farms. We want to be able to leverage that capability to reduce our bill, to reduce our impact on the environment. We actually want to power ourselves, but we probably need to construct something because maybe our head office is too far, right? So we would first identify the best locations. So where do we need that? Where do we consume the most? Where does it make sense? And then we'll probably need to construct those. And when that happens, our journey of provisioning the power will be different. We will make a difference. So our energy supply mix will be different. For the supplier, maybe we need to develop a sustainable supplier assessment tool to change those business rules. It could be technology behind it. Now, even when we do engage in a digital adoption plans or digital transformation plans, however you call them, in our experiences, it's never just technology. I just want to put it out there, never. There is always a component of the business process because you cannot put technology without figuring out the process. It's not going to work. It's not going to be useful. You need to understand what you're doing, how you're doing, and then make sure that the technology will work for you and enable you to do that. So even though there are digital adoption plans, they're never just. Okay.
Question on this one.
Yes.
I find it interesting that you use the task element here.
Yes, I thought you would.
Yeah.
So looking at the definition of the task,
yeah.
right? So what people want to accomplish, because we had that workshop and we had the joint group saying these things are important, we need to get them done as the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think they do have this task, right? Somebody would have to execute them. Yeah. And people, the whole purpose of the exercise is for people to believe that those things need to be done.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely correct. I just think for some people that might be confusing because there are people that think wrongly that experience is only about the customer, that there's a difference between a task as in jobs to be done, you know, something that a consumer wants to achieve in their life, like self-fulfillment and eating something and sleeping and I don't know, whatever you want to do in your life. And a task that we find in a project plan or in a process where it says update timesheets or something like construct power facilities. Is that actually a task of a person? But I find that tension actually quite interesting because fundamentally we are humans and we want to get things done. Jorai mentioned yesterday jobs to be done and getting things done, right? And so these frameworks, and so I think it's completely correct. Now, I'm just wondering if you ever ran into this conundrum of what kind of task are we talking about? Why are you talking about experience here? Isn't that just all blue? Isn't it just you know, constructing stuff and humans don't matter? You know,
I think we have some freedom in EDGY intentionally. So I would have modeled it as an activity, as a white element. That would mean that it's an activity, something is going on, right? And you can look at it from a red lens, my experiment, or from the process lens, then it's the blue one. So then you avoid this discussion. You say, because activity, you can't argue about activity. It's just you do something, right? And but for us, this is not so important. We've had this discussion a lot. So feel free to model it as a task. We are not in the rigorous enterprise architecture.
So I guess maybe semantics, but personally, I would read activity as more something that more ongoing. These things are limited in a time frame, so task felt closer. Okay. As opposed to more perpetual things that you want to be doing with the organization. But
that's interesting.
I might be wrong.
Yeah, I really like this point. We are in a room and we want to get this done. So it's a task.
And it's finite, right? There are measures of success and measures of when the task is done, and somebody would be able to say, check, for example. Yes, we did model them as tasks, but we would welcome your perspective. That's why we're here.
Well, I think it shows that just that conversation, and you worked a lot on that sort of thing. And this is where the value, because at the end of the day, people understand and can move forward. Man, it can be not perfect, but good for the group to go in the good direction.
As long as the group has the coherence, I think you've achieved your goal. I think everybody knows, again, back to that first picture. We all agree that this is where we're going and this is the path we're taking. I consider this right. And as a facilitator, whatever you need to do to get that coherence from the group, personally need words. Right. So yes, so put it in the context. Definitely shortcuts over here. Right. There are two scenarios. Historically, because the methodology I've been using it for probably around 8 years by now, EDGY did not exist. So historically, we would call this traceability, and it would be in an Excel. We're all love our Excel.
We do.
Right? So we would have it there. With EDGY, I think there's an opportunity to visualize it, right? And have a bit of a conversation. So very independently, but very similar to previous conversation, right? So if we look at it, and there's going to be more than one thing at the bottom, right? So we have our tasks. Identifying location is prerequisite, so you cannot really construct something if you don't know where you want to put it. So there's going to be some dependencies. So this is going to be constructing a solar farm. The solar farm will be providing energy, so this will come up later. We could have an option to have as is and to be for us architects who love our things, right? Or you can demonstrate with color or however, which arrows show up once you've done these things, right? So there's a lot of flexibility there, but really you can connect them and you can build essentially a story around it. Ultimately, that is traceability, just visualize. Yes.
That's just a comment. I think this example beautifully shows our concept of purpose. Because some people would say, okay, increasing share of sustainable by 50% by that's already in OKR, that's not a purpose. Some people would say, but we see purpose as a hierarchy. So
I think it's level. Yeah.
So, and you can always look for a higher purpose. And that's
absolutely,
maybe, I think that's the beauty of our purpose concept.
Yeah.
That you can also drill down into 50%, and how are we gonna do that? You can always break it down.
Yeah, there will be more than one of these.
Of course,
50%, right?
So we see them as purposes too, even if they are closer and closer to operations as to KPIs.
You can actually put a line from that to this, because ultimately that will probably help you with this, right? So you can totally build a hierarchy of these. That's essentially it. So conclusions. Conclusion is going to be very simple for me. So what I found through the EDGY methodology and through the enterprise design is when you're dealing with the strategic plan, the only way it can be truly strategic is if you look at all the 3 facets. Because if you're missing even one facet, it's not strategic, right? If you're missing the green, you don't know where you're going. It's just a plan to do something. If you're missing the red, you're missing the people out of the picture who are going to be executing that plan. You're going to be struggling with the change management. You're going to be struggling with, well, why do I need to do that? And the buy. And if you're missing the architecture, well, it's going to be hard to build without the blueprints, right? In a lot of cases, again, depending on what kind of ideas you come up with, initiatives, projects, whatever your terminology is, you may need to tap into organization, product, or brand, because they could be the things that you need to change as part of your idea, as part of your organization. So really, what it ends up being, it's pretty much a cross-section of everything. And then it's truly strategic. Otherwise, it's not quite there. Pretty much it. And yes, tasks. We did all of them as tasks. And that's it. I'm leaving some time and some room for questions. Yes.
So very nice presentation. As an architect myself, I recognize a lot of this also. Yes. And one of the things that architecture has been sort of beaten with over and over for many years is prove that you are worth it. Right?
Still are.
Yes, yes. I think it's fair enough. That's okay. But I could say the same here. Okay, so we're talking about value-driven decision-making of some sort, right? Whether it's green transition or it's money or it's safety of the people or whatever the value of the company is in this case. Have you, or perhaps also any other in here, tried to evaluate the efficiency of EDGY, using EDGY for this compared to not using EDGY for this, right? So what is the value of this design-driven things in this case?
My short answer will be not yet.
What would be the alternative then in your point of view?
Well, I don't know that I have all the answers, but certainly you see energy sector companies invest in thousands of projects all the time.
Yes.
And they have their investment offices and procurement and all these blah, blah, blah. And they evaluate these things in certain parameters. And my interpretation is not that you go in and you dictate what those parameters are.
We often adopt those, right? Because we do want to speak the same language. If they already have the prioritization model, you do want to refer to that because that's what people are familiar with. Yeah. You just want to make sure that you have that prioritization model and everybody agrees on that.
Yeah. Right. So it's more, there is a goal that they're working towards, right? We help them find out what it is and agree on it, but we don't make the goal for them. They should decide on that goal themselves. And are they doing that better now than they were before? When we're doing this.
So I hope yes, because we're bringing them together. Yes, potentially don't know, but my perspective is I actually don't ideate or I don't dictate anything to them. I'm a facilitator, and that's why the problem solving was there, right? Because I didn't make decisions for them. I'm more about asking the questions and managing the conversation so that they can decide. But also, when they do decide, they understand what the implications of the decision, right? What are the ramifications of this? If they still want to go ahead and do this, it's your choice. Go do it. As long as you understand that you're spending time and money and resources on something that's not going to give you much. But you're still free to do it, right? So I'm not going to prevent them from anything. They're still going to set their own goals. I'm more there to structure that discussion, make sure that they can come up and they agree on it.
I think that's a hard question, because I would compare it a bit to a question like, what is the value of all of us speaking English rather than our own native languages? Is it better with that common language, or but I know it's a bit of a critique. So I think we need to answer that question. But sorry.
Even without the EDGY, like there's still question: is this right? Okay, that's still on.
That's the whole point. I don't think the top management really cares if you use EDGY or you use something else. They have somewhere that they want to go. That's what you help them identify, right?
And
we are brave enough. I think that they really care in 10 years from now.
All right, cool. I think
because EDGY, it is not a tool for designers and not a playful thing only for those people like here at the end. I think on most people and customers is the C-suite, and we will bring it to the board. Be brave to make fun. Be brave. 5 years. Okay. 5 years.
Communication mechanism. Yes. So yes, language communication. Let's see. Yes. I don't know who was first.
Well, actually, just to answer your question quickly, I did have a use case where I didn't use it at first and then I moved to EDGY, but I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about The value, is very important, but it's also, it's a word. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. I'm project manager. I've seen that graph a lot. And I think the graph that you showed right before can help a lot of different people align on what value. And that is very key for high-level management, as much as the people who actually do the task are getting the capabilities. It creates meaning for that word that I really don't like because it's so subjective. That's what I really like about what you're showing.
Thank you. And I never put just the word out there. I usually have some criteria for people to refer to, yes, so that we can at least somewhat agree on what that means. Jonathan, I think you were next, and then
I'm gonna put it here. Maybe I talk a little bit. So just to put into context, you asked about like the value of EDGY, but I mean we're still on the early adopting phase of EDGY, so we don't have yet a lot of data, or at least like if I send a survey and what's the value in return on investment, but usually when you're on that phase, it's mostly qualitative. And I won't go fetch the qualitative data from the client. Because as someone that used, like I said, a screwdriver or a hammer, I know which one is better for me, and I will do that. So for me, my qualitative data is that, just like Matthew said, he wasn't using it, he's using it, it's easier for him. And just like Eric and I were doing a lot of facilitation and workshop, and then it brings clarity to our client, easier conversation. So I think with time that qualitative when we like return on the investment will come, but right now it's probably more qualitative. And how does that impact our individual work? Yeah.
So basically, you have like a multiple tool.
Yes.
Now they're electrified and powered.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
I think no, it's all right. We can. I'll have a discussion with you later about that.
How much interest has there been from businesses with adopting EDGY to become part of their business tool? Because you mentioned that EDGY is part of your consulting toolbox. After your workshops, was there interest from the business to say, let's adopt this now formally in our organization, or is it always going to be part of the consulting toolbox? Is it going to be aligned with this?
I don't think we had enough with it yet. So far, it is a little bit tricky, not yet. Maybe in the future. I hope in the future, right? But a lot of businesses are struggling just any kind of architectural tools. Yeah, not quite there, not yet. Probably, hopefully in the future. Yes.
If I can say a little sort of trick that I learned, which I think could be quite useful in my ideation basis. Once you've figured out the strategic options that you might want to pursue, and you're weighing up how to play and where to win. The great question which comes after that, you ask what would have to be true about my customers for this to work? What would have to be true about regulation? And what would have to be true about the company?
Right.
It's a really important question to ask the stakeholders as you're going into that place, that they're thinking about all the conditions that need to be in place for this to occur. So just like design says, how might we, so that, but what would have to be true question is also very impactful.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I did not mention is that we never deliver just a Gantt chart. That's actually important because what we found is that when you do just the Gantt chart for something as high level, the names on the bars, a month goes by, 2 goes by, nobody remembers what those are. Right? So what we usually do, we put a detailed slide for every bar that is like a mini business case that would have dependencies, that would have the linkages to kind of capabilities and goals. High level cost, we usually do t-shirt size a business value note. So everything that we came up with in the workshop, we do document that, and we find it actually critical for it to be important.
So maybe one last question.
Yes.
Because then we have, if there's one last question.
And yes, feel free to reach out after. I'll be happy to talk about this. Okay, well, thank you so much.